Hey, everybody. Welcome to our webinar today, Rebates and Incentives, Lowering the Cost of Electrification. I'm Joe Wachunas here, as always, with my teammate, Brian Stewart. We'll introduce our panelists in just a second. Today's webinar is being brought to you by Electrify Now, an all-volunteer organization promoting electrification as the quickest path to decarbonization and something that all of us can take an active part in achieving. And it's also brought to you by the LEARN program, which is a San Diego-based workforce education and training program that is partnered with Electrify Now to offer these free energy efficiency and electrification webinars. Please visit the LEARN website for more information, www.sandiegolearn.com. They've got a lot of great content. And this webinar is part of our Go Electric series. We're talking about all the benefits of electrification for homeowners, which include lower energy bills in most parts of the country, cleaner indoor air, and of course, less pollution outside, better comfort, and and increased safety. Think of your induction stove. So today, Brian, we are talking about rebates. Set the stage for us.
Yeah, so we have two amazing panelists, which we'll introduce in a minute to go into the details. But just for a little context, it's important, I think, to understand where the money comes from for these incentives. And there's basically three buckets. You can think of it this way. There's money that comes from the federal government, either in the form of these federal tax credits, which is a thing that's been, most people are familiar with, but we'll go into more detail about that. That is, managed through the IRS. So basically, you pay and then you get a discount on your tax bill. But the feds also distribute money to the states for these rebate programs, which are relatively new and just rolling out over the last year. We'll talk more about. The states manage it, but it's federally funded money. And then the states themselves have sources of funding for efficiency programs. In some cases, even cities or municipal governments have funds set aside for efficiency programs. And we're using California here as an example, but that's another source of funds. And then the third bucket comes from utilities themselves or from ratepayers who pay money into efficiency programs that are then managed through this combination typically of the state and the utilities. So, this is the sort of where the money comes from, but then how you access it can be kind of complicated, which is exactly why we're having this webinar today. And we hope to be able to answer all your questions about, what's going on with the Inflation Reduction Act? What is it doing? What are we worried about it? Because of course, with this administration change, there's different attitudes about this that we'll get into. And then, of course, we'll cover the IRA tax credits and then this new source of money, the rebates, which are really exciting. We'll also talk about utility and state-funded incentives. There's income qualifications that you need to be aware of for some of these programs. We'll talk about that. And can you combine these things? Hopefully we'll answer all your questions and give you really good information about where you can go to find information in your area about the incentives that are available. And we have for our guests today, two really amazing, couldn't think of better people to have with us. We've got David Freeman, who's the Senior Director of Federal Policy at Rewiring America. Some of you may know that Rewiring America was very instrumental in the way the IRA incentive program has rolled out, and they're a really incredible organization that leads nationally on electrification in general. David has served in leadership and advocacy and research roles at Consumer Reports and the Union of Concerned Scientists and the Department of Energy's Office of Efficiency and Renewable Energy and the Department of Transportation before going to Rewiring America. So he's got a lot of policy and technology expertise across this whole spectrum of energy efficiency issues, from electrification to renewable energy, economics, and auto safety. So really excellent to have David with us today, and he'll be our first presenter. Then we'll hand it over to Andre Muir, who's Director of Product at Building Decarbonization Coalition, which is another amazing organization that I think anyone who's interested in electrification should be aware of them. They're, really active in California, but have also been working nationally and now have really good programs in not only California, but Washington State and New York State, and plans to take over the whole country, I think, eventually, which we're really excited about, because one of the things that you're going to see today is that Andre, he leads the creation of the digital platform that helps homeowners, renters, and contractors switch to electric technologies that's called the Switches On website, which is state of the art, in my opinion, in terms of a state-based tool that gives you everything you need to know about why to electrify, but also how to do it and the incentives that are available and even contractors to work with. So Andre is the one who's leading, building this tool for people. And again, it's most robust in California, but it's rolling out in other states as well. His background is in management consulting and software leadership, and in designing these practical user-friendly tools to help simplify the path to electrification. So two really amazing speakers. We're going to, David's going to be giving us kind of a national picture, and the rewiring tool is one of the best ways for anyone across the country to get into the electrification knowledge space. And then Andre is going to give us more of a picture about what's going on in California, as a sort of an example of how all these incentives we're talking about kind of come to bear in one state. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to David to get us started. And maybe while he's pulling up his presentation, we just want to remind everyone out in our audience that if you've got questions, please put them in the Q&A, and we'll do our best to answer those either along the way or during our Q&A section towards the end. Thanks, David.
Thank you, Brian and Joe, and great to be here presenting with Andre as well. And just so excited to have so many people here and interested in this important topic. I'm David Friedman. That's not actually what I look like, but that is Mr. Heat Pump. And in many ways, that's who we are. We are an organization that wants to help every single American household benefit from the amazing opportunities that exist through electrification and complementary technologies like weatherization, insulation, better windows. Why? Well, absolutely one of the reasons is to help address climate change, but let's also look at where the world is right now. We are in an energy affordability crisis, and we need help from every single person on this webinar to fight back against that, not both in terms of your investments, your decisions, and then also making sure we protect some of the programs that help ensure that people across this country can benefit from this great technology. So let's talk more about what this technology can do and where we are. And I think the first thing we have to face up to is right now in this country, Americans are not thriving when it comes to their energy bills. In fact, many Americans aren't quite surviving when it comes to their energy bills. Why? Well, over the last 4 years, energy costs are up by almost 1/3. There was a huge spike early on, then it's gone up and down a little bit. What I will add, though, is it's already rising again. So American households are spending, I was shocked when I did the math on this number, we are spending about $1 billion a day to heat, cool, and power our homes. That's a lot of money. And so it's no wonder almost 80% of Americans are stressed out about their energy bills. It's also hitting people who can least afford it the hardest, and it's getting worse. 1/3 of households in this country are having to choose between bare necessities and paying their utility bills. Not only is that not acceptable, it's not necessary. There are pathways, there are better ways forward, and electrification and weatherization are key parts of that, especially when you look at the reality that we're staring at a possible 15% increase in energy prices over the next few years. People can't afford it. They need help. They need solutions. And I need to better work my presentation. There we go. All right. So what are those better solutions? Well, it is electrification. It is weatherization. In this chart, I'm trying to give a sense of how much money is on the table to be saved by American households. If you look at where we were in 2020, people were spending a little under $2,500 a year on their utility bills. Today, it's up over $3,000 due to that energy price spike. But guess what? If you simply install a heat pump water heater, and weatherize your home, you can drop that by almost $1,000. So you can go back to before 2020 when it comes to how much folks were spending on energy bills. And that's just from a few technologies out there that are easily accessible, affordable, available, but not everyone has them. You can go even further if you add home solar. Home solar really fundamentally changes the equation and unlocks even more of the benefits of home electrification. In that case, you can talk about a savings of more than $2,000. So it is incredible. You can get on the order of a 75% reduction in your energy bill by investing in electrification and weatherization. So, of course, everyone should be doing this, but that's not the only reason why everyone should be doing this, because it's not just about fighting the energy affordability crisis. It's also about protecting and expanding our economy. Electrification is where supply meets demand. We have so many opportunities to employ people in the country as we invest in and increase the demand for electrification and weatherization. Last year, we put out a study that showed that if we rapidly accelerate towards electrification and weatherization, we can generate about 3 million jobs in the United States, domestic jobs across this country. So we're not only saving people money, we're strengthening our economy, we're employing more people. In fact, one of the things we're going to talk about today are the tax incentives that Brian mentioned. And we just did an analysis that showed in 2023 alone, federal tax incentives that supported insulation, that supported heat pumps, that also supported natural gas furnaces, and home solar, home geothermal, battery storage, supported about 450,000 jobs in the United States in 2023. And we're expecting, as more and more people take advantage of those tax credits, that number is only going to go up. Well, what kind of jobs are those? As I mentioned, part of the key here is getting to domestic manufacturing. More and more investment is going on in this country to make heat pumps, to make insulation, better windows, all of those technologies. And so in 2023 alone, we're talking almost 50,000 jobs supported by those tax credits. Then, of course, just because it's made doesn't mean it's in someone's home. Someone's got to distribute that on the wholesale and retail level. So there's close to 25,000 jobs there. But then look at this amazing next number here, almost 120,000 jobs when it comes to local installation. These are contractors in your neighborhoods, in your towns, in your states who have more jobs. They can support more people, and they're bringing this technology into homes across the country. You cannot outsource local installation. You cannot outsource domestic distribution. And as long as we also protect manufacturing tax credits, we're going to have the manufacturing jobs here in the United States. And let's not forget all the people who help make clothes, make food, and otherwise support the manufacturers, the distributors, and the installers. There's over 250,000 jobs in supporting them. So electrification is key to households saving money, it's key to climate, and it's key to strengthening our economy and creating jobs. So how are we going to get there? Part of the meat of this conversation today is to talk about all the different incentives and tools that are out there that can help us access all of those benefits that I just talked about. And I know, folks are here on a webinar about electrification, so on some level, maybe the first few slides were preaching to the choir, but these are why these incentives are so important, because you need to unlock those benefits. It does cost more upfront in many cases to electrify. It costs more upfront to weatherize your home. We want to get to the point where that's just a standard decision everyone makes. But right now, as we're making this transition, people need help. And so as part of the IRA, something Rewiring America and many other groups worked on, we have an amazing set of tax credits that are on the books right now that anyone and everyone who qualifies can take advantage of and have been doing so for a couple of years. The first one is targeted at heat pumps, heat pump water heaters, weatherization, even upgrading your electrical panels. That'll cover up to 30% of the cost, though it's capped at $3,200 a year. That's a lot of money. This is based on a tax credit that has existed for 20 years, but it used to be only $500 that was available, and it was capped as to how much you could use. So this change, this addition, as part of the IRA, really helped unlock opportunity for taxpayers across the country. Similarly, the 25D tax credit for solar power and storage, that's a tax credit that also goes back 20 years. You can cover 30% of the cost of installing solar and or storage on your home. That tax credit at times has run out. It's sunsetted. Both of these tax credits were extended for about 10 years. So that is a nice window of opportunity to accelerate this industry and to accelerate these opportunities. There were also some continuation of tax credits for EVs and for EV charging. All of these are at risk, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. Now, there's also rebates, because why? Well, not everyone can afford to pay taxes. There's a lot of folks out there who are struggling to get by, and they get trapped in a cycle, a bad economic cycle, where they can't afford their utility bills, they can't afford to repair their appliances, and so they're stuck with an inefficient and often degrading performance HVAC unit, or they don't have the insulation they need, and they just have to keep paying more and more for the utility bills, and they keep putting off those repairs and that new technology. These rebates are targeted at low and moderate income households to help them get over that barrier to access all of this great technology. And these are the rebates that Brian mentioned before. There's almost $9 billion that were made available at the federal level and given to every state and territory but one. For some reason, South Dakota said, I don't want to help our residents save money on their utility bills, but every other state and every other territory applied for and has been legally granted this money to target these technologies for those who most need these benefits. So that's the broad landscape. That's a lot of different stuff. It can get confusing. What qualifies? There's maximum numbers. There's different conditions of who does and doesn't qualify. It can get confusing. Oops. So sorry, I put that in the wrong order. Because it can get confusing, we have created some fantastic tools that you can access on our website to find out for you, for your specific home in your zip code, what's available in terms of the federal tax incentives and the state rebates. But we didn't stop there. We also tried to make sure to have state incentives, local incentives, utility programs. So if you look at the middle column, the personal electrification planner, I've got the website there that you can go to. And Brian said they're also going to make sure you get that website in the chat. Go there, put your home information in, or whether you rent or own, we will give you information on all the different credits and rebates and programs that are available in your state. If you want to dive in a little bit deeper on a specific technology, our savings calculator is also a great tool to give you to get into the weeds a little bit on, say, an HVAC unit. And of course, if you have any other questions about electrification, you want to learn even more about the benefits and the opportunities, please go to our website. We've got a ton of resources there for you to learn more.
And I just want to remind our audience too, because I know this comes up a lot. We'll get all these presentations to you. Anyone who registered will get an email with this, and we'll put all these links that we're talking about here in that as well. So don't worry about trying to copy that down too quickly if you didn't get it.
Excellent. Thank you, Brian. All right. So that's what's available. That's why we should do it. That's what's available in terms of incentives. And this is how to find out more about how to take advantage of all those amazing benefits and those resources. So what's going on in our nation's capital right now when it comes to these tax credits and incentives? Well, I got to be honest, we don't know yet. Congress did just recently pass a budget resolution where they're targeting significant cuts in spending, significant changes in the tax code, and much more. We are expecting by around May 9th to get more details about specifically how they're going to change the tax code and what programs they might cut. I can't predict what they're going to do. I am concerned, though, because of various statements that have been made, both by the new administration and Republican leaders in Congress, that they are seriously considering cutting, for example, some of the EV tax credits and maybe even some of the tax credits for homeowners tied to this technology. So I don't know what they will do, but I do know if they cut these programs, it's going to lead to layoffs. All those jobs I talked about, if demand goes down, supply goes down, and jobs go down. Not just in manufacturing, but in retail, wholesale, and installation. People are going to pay more for the utility bills, right? I showed you the potential to save $1,000, $2,000. Well, if you can't afford to upgrade your HVAC unit to a more efficient electrified unit, or if you can't afford to add insulation or better windows, you're going to pay more for your utility bills as prices continue to go up. We're also going to have less capacity on the grid. People are understandably excited about the possibility of AI and onshoring manufacturing. That takes electricity. And our grid has been roughly the same size in terms of the amount of energy and power we've been using for a long time, but it's about to start, it's already growing and it's about to start skyrocketing. If we don't find places to use less power, that means we're going to have to build a lot more expensive power plants. The cheapest capacity on the grid is the capacity that someone no longer uses. And that's where efficiency and weatherization not only help homeowners, but can help businesses and help the country invest in things like AI and domestic manufacturing. Also, if we stop making a lot of this stuff here, our economy is going to fall behind on manufacturing and economically as we try to compete with countries like China. So there are real risks to the tax credit, but I admit I am hopeful. We are working every single day to reach Democrats and Republicans and independents. This is saving people money is not a partisan issue. And so we are working every day to try to protect these tax credits. And I would honestly ask each and everyone on this call to think about who's your representative, who's your senator. We can potentially provide help in targeting some folks and letting them know you care about these programs and you want to protect these programs, maybe for yourself, but also for your neighbors and for our nation. Next, let's talk about rebates. Now, pardon me while I pop back up because I put it out of order. This is a map of where the rebates are across this country. As you can see, there's a lot of color in this map. It's quite exciting. Like I said, other than South Dakota, every single state and territory not on this map are in some stage of moving forward with the rebates, both for home electrification and weatherization or for a whole home retrofit. Those are the two major categories of rebates that are available. In the kind of deepest purple states, as of February 12th, those were states where both the programs were already available. Since then, we know other states have been starting to move forward, but we know that it's approved everywhere. The challenge we've been facing here is initially the new administration came in and froze all this money to the states. They wouldn't allow the states to access that money. That created some chaos. Many states had to pause their programs because they couldn't float the money to get these rebates to consumers. Now, the good news is since then, any state that had already started with their program now has access to the money and they're starting to roll out. But we're going to hear more about California. California was one of those states that temporarily paused, but now is moving forward. The challenge is there's a lot of states who are only just getting started, and they still need some approvals from the Department of Energy. and they've been slashing staff. So right now, there aren't enough people at the Department of Energy to review changes and review programs to move those states forward. So I hate to say it, but in a lot of these states, other than the deeper purple states, you know, and the hash states where at least some programs are already available, there's uncertainty. And so again, this is a place where if you're a contractor, if you're a consumer, reach out to your governor's office and ask them to reach out to the Department of Energy and push them to free up those funds, get the staff they need to approve those programs so the states can run forward. Again, because these are programs that help those who can least afford to pay high energy bills. So let me wrap just by saying, where do we go from here? Are there risks? Absolutely. But the fact is, electric machines are better. They're a better technology. They're a better opportunity. I would say the same thing when it comes to insulation and better windows. And for our country, for American households, it's a more affordable solution. So we've got to keep moving forward. Anyone who can move forward without these incentives should be running forward. Anyone who does need the incentives, you should be running forward. Anyone who does need the incentives and they're not available yet, we need you out there helping to fight to protect these programs and to keep them in place. That's where this map comes in, is just to point out that earlier I showed you the average savings. These are savings by congressional districts. Every single congressional district across this country, these are the people who are making the decisions about, for example, the tax credits. In every single congressional district across the country, households will save at least $1,500 tied to these tax credits. In some districts, you're talking well over $4,000. Any of these districts, especially the deeper purple ones, if you live there, consider reaching out to your member of Congress and asking them to protect the tax credits and protect the rebates. It's in their own self-interest to serve their constituents, given how much money is at the table. So with that, I just want to say thank you. I know I ran through a lot of stuff there, and happy to go through a lot of Q&A as we go forward, but these are important programs and really appreciate your attention and interest.
Thanks, David. And you know, we're seeing some good questions in the chat that I think what we'll do is hold those for our Q&A section when after Andre has done his presentation. So let's tee it up for Andre, and then we'll get into some Q&A later.
All right. Thanks, Brian. I shan't keep us long. Thanks, David, for that amazing presentation. I'm a user of the Rewiring America website and tools myself, and I personally know the team that builds them. So you guys are doing a great job. All right. So, sorry, just a moment here. I share my screen. This should all be good to go. All right, you will shout if you cannot see my screen, but I assume you all can. All right, I'm Andre Mirror. So for the past 2 years, I've been leading the development of the digital platform behind the switches on. My background is as a software engineer and product manager, so I tend to focus on building tools that try and simplify complex processes as much as possible. And to that end, my team and I spend a lot of time sort of buried in the landscape of incentives across the United States, and especially in California, which we'll focus on a little, with a goal to make the process of switching to electric appliances easier for everyone. So a little bit about the switches on, for those of you who are not familiar with it. So the switches on was created in 2019 as a campaign to help Californians switch to electric appliances. Since then, we've expanded our reach, both within California, but also to other states like Washington and now New York, with a mission to educate, inspire, and make switching electric easier for communities, for contractors, and for everyone who lives in a building. So that's you, that's me, and that's everybody else we know. And a little bit of moment of fun here. So the picture you see here, this is part of our effort to inspire It's from a music video that was written and performed by one of our volunteer ambassadors. It's the steamy heat pump song that you did not know that you needed until now. So you can go to the Switches On blog to check it out. So aside from producing music videos, one of the key things that the Switches On focuses on is making incentives as accessible as possible. And the reason for that, as David was pointing out, incentives are core to their home electrification journey. So anyone here who has ever electrified any part of their homes understands how high the upfront costs can be, and how important the incentives are to lower that upfront cost. So we like to think of this journey in three steps, which is a bit of a funnel, as you see here. So the first one is like educating, where the awareness of the incentives is super important for people to understand that they're there and people can get them. Inspiring, where sort of actionable guides and resources can help people solidify their plan of action. And the Rewiring America planner is a great example of that. And switching, where the ability to easily access and actually claim those incentives is crucial, right? A big part of that is the ability to find contractors who need to, at the very least, facilitate and in many cases sort of claim these incentives for customers. Unfortunately, there's a lot of friction in when trying to access these incentives. So last year, the state of California created this public-private partnership called the California Heat Pump Partnership, which has published a blueprint mapping out the path to reach the state's goal of installing 6 million heat pumps by 2030. So that blueprint, it's called the Path to 6 Million. It calls out some of the major barriers to mass adoption of heat pumps. Many of those barriers, as you can see there, are related to incentives. So some of the key ones are the upfront costs, as I mentioned. So the higher initial price tag for these projects is common. The design of these incentive programs tend to be overly complex and can discourage participation sometimes, as anyone who's ever tried to navigate those, I'm sure, has been frustrated. The application process can be very burdensome, lots of documentation. It might take a long time to actually get the money back from these rebates. I think probably most crucially, there's a lack of consistent long-term funding for these programs, which means their rebates, they tend to come and go as programs stop and start multiple times. This creates significant market uncertainty for contractors and for consumers, right? It can really discourage people from committing to these installations. The permitting process can be very slow and complex. That includes costs, creates more costs and creates more delays. In the permitting, it's obviously required by law for any of these projects, but it's often bypassed for gas appliances, right? But if you want to claim money back from these programs, having a permit is mandatory, right? So that creates an uneven playing field. And there's also things like awareness, problems with customer demand, contractor reluctance to prioritize heat pumps, right? So this is all due to things like lack of familiarity, lack of training, some natural hesitation to adopt a new technology, limited demand in the market, and crucially, incentives that are inconsistent and difficult to understand. So these problems are all general. They exist in many places, right? But the landscape in California is especially complex. And I apologize here for the use of so many acronyms, but I think this rather illustrates the complexity of this landscape, as does my skill at creating very messy slides. I think that's rather fitting here. But so focusing specifically on rebates in California, right? So the Tech Clean California is the main program in the state. So Tech provides heat pump and heat pump water heater rebates, right? That in most cases, they're quite generous. And this is claimed through certified contractors who meet minimum training criteria, right? So meaning A contractor needs to get certified by the program. They need to undergo some training. Then the customer selects a tax certified contractor who then passes on the savings to the customer and then goes and claims their money back from the program. The HERA program, this is short for, HERA is short for, I might get it wrong here, High Efficiency Electric Home Rebate Act, I believe I'm right with that. So this is a program created by the California Energy Commission using federal funds from the Inflation Reduction Act that David was talking about. This program is managed through Tech Clean California, and it provides a range of incentives for income qualified customers in single family and multifamily homes. So that means things like heat pumps and heat pump water heaters, in some cases providing up to $8,000, as you can see there. But also things for like electrical panels, induction stoves, and even heat pump clothes dryers. The HERA incentives are income dependent. So there's an income verification tool that customers can use to get pre-qualified for these rebates. And these needs to be done before people engage with a contractor. The HERA program had a very strong launch last October, but it has gone through some fits and starts due to funding problems, and that created a lot of frustration with contractors and with customers. It is now back online, although because the funding is structured by region, I believe the funding for Northern California has already been fully reserved, but it's still available throughout the rest of the state. So HERA is the first tranche of IRA funds to come to California. There are more phases still to come. But to my knowledge, the CEC has not yet published a timeline for launching the other phases of the program, although I understand they're trying to get that done as soon as possible. So Tech and HERA are certainly the two main programs in California. So they're available statewide, big dollar amounts, right? But aside from those and from federal tax credits, there are also rebates available at the regional level. And this is where things get really tricky. So the regional incentives, they could be with a particular CCA or a particular a utility or some other regional government. But because each region is different, there are often overlaps and exceptions depending on things like where the county lines are or the utility service service area. So it's important to check all of the fine print. To cite just one example, PG&E, that's Pacific Gas and Electric. It has a very large service territory across Central and Northern California. But you could also have CCAs that operate within the PG&E territory. And those CCAs could have their own rebates only for their customers that don't apply to PG&E customers, despite being within the same territory. And then you also have regional energy networks. One example is BayREN. So that's a network that includes 9 Bay Area counties. And they provide some incentives through their own certified contractor network as well. Luckily, many of the BayREN contractors are also Tech Clean California contractors, in which case you can get both rebates. And then on top of that, there are like local rebates as well, which might come from a specific municipal utility or city, or even the city library in some cases. And you can see some of those on the screenshot there. Right, there's just so many different layers of incentives, right? And that's the thing that makes California so complicated, right? Because other states, they have very robust and strong programs. You know, I'm thinking of Efficiency Maine or Massachusetts MassSave, where I am. They mostly focus on establishing a single statewide incentive program, right? Which is much easier for contractors and consumers to work with. Now, most other states are much smaller and frankly, much simpler than California and don't have a bunch of towns and regional networks putting money towards this stuff. Right? So in order to maximize savings, it's important to understand what the full stack of rebates is. That is all of the rebates that you can claim for your own location, for your own project. And these rebates from different programs, they can often be combined, but not always. So it's important to check the requirements each time. So how to make this all simple, right? So all of that complexity is why tools like rewirings and like the switches on are important, right? And often the best way to go and maximize these savings. So the switches on has a website with educational content, including a blog and a newsletter with tips to make the most out of these incentives. And if you're in California, we have in-person events as well that are run by our network of local volunteers, so you can check the events calendar. We also provide a couple of handy tools that my team has built to help people switch. So the two most popular tools on our website are the ones listed there. So the incentive finder, it lists all the incentives at all levels for a few states. I'll get into that a little bit. And then a contractor finder is especially helpful for places like California, where you can go to it to find tech certified contractors who can help you access the tech and hero rebates and other rebates as well. Drilling into a little bit quickly to the incentive finder. So the best way to learn about all the incentives in your location, especially if you're in California, and cut through this whole fog. So open up our incentive finder tool. So to do that, you go to incentives.switcheson.org, you type in your zip code, and then you get a list of all available incentives at all levels, and then you can filter things like the equipment type or even the specific program if you're after a specific rebate. And because contractors also indicate which programs they participate in when they register with the switches on, you can also find contractors directly through the incentives listing on our incentive finder. So the coverage is pretty extensive for California. And you'll be able to see every rebate that's available to you. But it's important to read through the requirements for each one. There's often rules around the type of equipment, the efficiency ratings, whether or not you're switching from fossil fuels, minimum training by the contractor, sometimes household income, and other things that vary from rebate to rebate, right? So please check the requirements. And we try to keep this listing as up to date as we possibly can. We work directly with these programs, right? And we make updates to the incentives listing on a weekly basis, and sometimes more often than that as incentives come and go. And increasingly, last but not least, I'll just put a little bit of a plug here for this initiative called the Node Collective. So this is a nonprofit organization that was set up by the BDC, Rewiring America, and other organizations to create a centralized national database of electrification incentives to make that available for the market for free, so that folks like the Switches On, Rewiring, and other orgs can create bigger and better tools to help people navigate this space. And with that, I will pause, and maybe we'll have time for Q&A, right?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Andre. That was fantastic. Yes, we've got lots of good questions. So maybe let me start off with one that I saw in the chat here about businesses versus residents. I mean, I think in our program, we typically have this mentality of homeowners as our kind of starting point for this, but would businesses qualify for some of these credits and incentives?
So these incentives are focused on homeowners. There are, depending on what your business is and what your situation is, there are also business related tax credits.
Got it.
I'll say, Brian, the Switches On does focus primarily on residents and homeowners, but there are some commercial incentives listed within the tool as well. It's not as comprehensive as for homes, but some of them can be found in there, and some are provided through the Tech Clean California program.
Great.
Andre, a question for you. You were talking about this fog of complicated rebates, especially in California. Switches On is a good resource to cut through the fog. Do you also, should a homeowner be, relying on contractors to understand these? Or what's your recommendation on how much a homeowner should do the research before, or just rely on their contractor?
Yeah, gosh, great question. So having just gone through that process myself, I'm in Massachusetts, I'm not in California, so the landscape here is a little simpler. But it is very important to do your own research to understand what the landscape is. Now, contractors are more and more up to speed with these programs, and especially if you're dealing with a program like Tech Clean California, contractors do understand the rules for those incentives really, really well. So yes, you can rely on contractors for that kind of information, but I highly recommend that it's rather doing both rather than either or.
Yeah. So another question I saw in the chat was around the I would just want to put a point on that last comment though. I mean, it reinforces the whole general notion that in this space, it's so important to work with a good contractor who one knows what they're doing, two is excited about electrification, and three, if they're really on their game, they will know the rebates and incentives that are available. It doesn't mean you should, I agree with Andre, you should do your own research, but it points to the need to find really good contractors. And that's another aspect of both these tools that we're talking about, Rewiring America and the BDC switches on. They have a reference for contractors that's going to help hopefully get you to someone who can really provide you good service. The other question I saw in the chat was around new construction versus retrofits. How do these rebates and incentives deal with those two scenarios?
At least for the federal incentives that I mentioned, they are focused on retrofits. And it's for a variety of reasons. One, if you're building a whole new home, you're probably typically in a different economic category. But also, interestingly, for a new home, it's a lot cheaper to just start with electric. There are costs you can avoid if you just go with electric. You don't have to put in a bunch of gas lines. The economics are much better when it comes to new construction. So the need is lower there. But if anyone's building a new home, definitely Electrify. It'll be a simpler and better home. There's no doubt about that.
David, there are a couple of new construction tax credits. I'm not totally familiar, but if they're Energy Star certified or have the DOE Zero Energy Ready Home certification, do you know anything about those?
Yeah, I'm honest. I'm less familiar with those. Yes, there are other programs out there, but typically, yeah, the biggest opportunity is for retro.
Okay, well, yeah, I'm just know a little as myself, so we'll try to get some information in the chat for new construction as well. But thanks for that.
There's I do know that most of the rebates in California only apply to retrofits. Now, California does have a separate program called the California Electric Homes Program, CalEHP, which there's incentives for property developers building all electric homes, i.e. homes that do not have a gas connection to them. You can find some information about that on the Switches On website as well if you look for all electric homes.
Yeah, I know in Oregon here, there's a similar thing that it's really trying to motivate the big developers, the people who do 400 homes at a time to build them electric. So it's different than, an individual who's wanting to build their own home. You might not be qualified for those, but yeah, it's an important piece of making sure that the new things we build are built the way we want.
Um,
And real quick, I just see David and I put some links in the chat to some information there.
Great. What about renters? So, we actually, we're doing a webinar on renters next month. And one of the things I've been really curious to ask you guys about is there a scenario where someone who doesn't own their property, who is in a rental property, could take advantage of these rebates to install, let's say, an induction stove or something? Maybe they work with their landlord and say, I want to do this. I qualify because of my income qualifications. Is that a thing? Is that a realistic scenario? And is that happening that you're aware of? Maybe I'll ask that to Andre first, because you guys are probably farthest along in rolling out these rebate programs.
Yeah, renters are a difficult position. I think most of the rebates tend to benefit the homeowner, but more than the renter. Now, the induction stoves are an interesting one. I think it's not my jam here, but I'm sure the renters are eligible for those, and there's certainly a lot of induction stove loaner programs as well, that people can try out an induction stove for free, and that's certainly applicable to renters. And induction is often the easiest place to start, lower barrier for entry for renters. Yeah.
Okay, David, I see you nodding your head there. You want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, I will add a couple of things. One, yes, there are ways that, you know, multifamily homes can get access to tax credits or other incentives. There are actually adder programs where if you link renewable energy to a multifamily project where, say, at least 50% of the residents are low-income consumers, you not only get the base tax credit associated with the renewables, you actually get an adder on top of that. So there are programs out there that help renters, but yes, it usually often has to be coordinated and organized with who's ever building or modifying. But also there are other things, and I put in a link from Rewiring America. There's other ways that you can do things. You can, you know, start with a hot plate instead of, you know, a full stove. And honestly, that's a good way to build experience with the technology. I did that on the V. I got a plug-in hybrid. And I have to say, within a month, I hated it every time the gasoline engine turned on, and I desperately wanted an EV. And I think people will experience the same kind of thing, you know, with an induction hot plate. I think there was also some conversation about window units. Window units right now are in a bit of a uncertain space, but we are getting to the point where window units will be able to qualify and can be a great option as well.
Yeah,
In the window unit, you can
we will be doing a webinar
window
on that exact topic later on this summer as well, because it's one of our most popular ones. But yeah, this new generation of window units, I think, is going to be a real game changer. They're more expensive, but they will, I think, because they meet these federal standards, they should be able to qualify, is my understanding. But we'll dig into that in our upcoming webinar.
So I guess, Andre, why do you think programs like California have not developed statewide? You know, what makes one state's incentives easier to navigate than another? And how do we get all states to be as easy as possible?
Yeah, I think California pays the price for being the first and being in the forefront of these, right? So I think a lot of the things that they tried out, you know, this is great. Like, the people there are really electrifying at a fast clip, and they're really helping people, especially like lower middle income folks. But it is, I think, because they're the first, you know, I think the program design ends up not being ideal, especially because of the diversity and complexity of California as a state. That's my sense, is what's sort of shining through there. Whereas, you know, a state like Maine, you know, has probably, you know, the best sort of heat pump adoption rates in the nation, and a great program, but also the benefit of being a, you know, pretty small state with a small population that's not as diverse geographically as California's is.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, it feels so different state by state. I know here in Oregon we have it's not maybe quite as complicated as California, but we have, you know, two and a half big IOUs, you know, big investor-owned utilities, and then we've got, you know, dozens of small municipal utilities. And so that adds some complexity as well, which is similar to kind of the CCA situation you've got in California, where you've got multiple players in the utility space, which also adds complexity. Speaking of Oregon, one of our questions was about, and maybe we can talk about Oregon, but maybe how this applies nationally too. That map, David, that you showed about the states that are, going ahead now with the rebate programs versus those that are approved but haven't started yet. Tell us a little bit about why there's this gap between, people who are ready to go and other people who aren't quite doing it yet.
Yes, I mean, happy to at a high level.
Yeah.
So part of it is because this is new. I mean, yes, various states, like California's got a lot of experience with some of this stuff. New York has a lot of experience with this stuff. But even in those cases, there were specific requirements that Congress put on these, or in some cases, the Biden administration put on these. So I think some of it is a mix of things. Some states have never done programs quite like this before, and so they need to hire staff and build up the capacity and expertise to be able to do this. In other cases, states may have existing programs, but they had to go through internal processes to update those programs so that they would meet the requirements of these rebates. And the other frustrating part, in some cases, states just got approved towards the end of last year, but each state has to kind of write a plan and say how they're going to do this. And many of them were counting on assistance from the Department of Energy as part of doing that, or they need the Department of Energy to approve that plan in order to move forward. Well, again, if you're decimating the staff at the Department of Energy, you don't have the people who can process it. And, as someone who worked at the Department of Energy, I know these people. They are dedicated. They care deeply about their mission and delivering benefits for the American public. So that is where we need pressure from everyone to your governor's office. Those are going to be the most influential on this, to say, please, get that staffing back so that we can get that money. And again, it's across the country. This is not partisan money. This is American money. Yeah.
Maybe, I know we're running out of time here and have a hard stop at the top of the hour. Maybe a thought. We did get a question about how tariffs might influence rebates. So any thoughts from both of you on how the tariff landscape could highlight the importance of rebates, or what you see in your crystal ball? I don't know who would love to start that one.
Well, I can give a partial non-answer, because the reality is, just being honest, we haven't mapped out yet the sources of where all these different components come from. And honestly, that's, to give a really good answer, that's what you would need. But I will say, from a basic perspective, and I think you're seeing a lot of people say this, tariffs raise prices. They raise prices on energy, which on the one hand means it's all the more important to invest in energy saving options, but they are likely to also raise prices on a lot of this equipment as well. And if people are spending more money, then they have less money to spend on these upgrades. So I don't think anyone really knows, but I do think they're likely to hurt more than they're much more likely to help when it comes to these technologies.
I'll second all of that, and I'll just add that I think the thing I'm mostly concerned about, not being an expert in tariffs, but there's a lot of uncertainty in the market that gets created with how these tariffs are being applied, which comes on top of the uncertainty that we have around the funding for these incentive programs, and that can be really detrimental to the trust that people put in these programs, and it could really discourage folks from participating. So I would say, like, even worse than the actual impact on the actual sticker price is really the uncertainty the added uncertainty that could generate.
Yeah, I'm definitely worried about that myself. And I see there's some couple of questions in the chat that have to do with tech clean and the pause, and that, and then which is exactly the point you were making, Andre, about how some of this funding is inconsistent in terms of whether it's available today versus tomorrow versus next week. Yeah. So I think, I don't know if you want to answer those questions, but it sounds like what we've learned from you is that if you do see that the program has been paused, it's like check back later. Any other advice you would give the people?
Gosh, check back later. Look, I can say nothing but empathize with that sentiment. It's hugely frustrating, not only for the people trying to access these incentives. Like, it's frustrating for us. Like, we work in maintaining this data. We work very closely with the Tech Clean California program, and the amount of cost and effort and energy that's spent on these fits and starts it's not great.
Yeah. And I'll just quickly add, we have the same challenge on our website where we can't, because things are changing, it's not always the latest. So we always recommend folks go to the state websites and, again, contact your governor. If you go there and it says it's not available, yes, check back later, but also do something. Try to help make them available.
That's a good call.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll say that specifically with the Tech Clean California program, we work, the switches on works very, very close directly with the program, so that all the information is up there on the switches on as soon as possible. So you can trust the information on the switches on with regards to the tech and HERA programs in California. But the frustration is there, and yeah, there's nothing I can do to help there.
Well, good. We should probably wrap up. Joe, do you have any last questions or thoughts?
No, just a big thank you to our panelists for their time today and answering those questions. And thanks to everybody for joining us. Back to you, Brian.
Yeah, thanks everybody. And thank you so much, David and Andre. I couldn't have asked for more in terms of answering these difficult questions. And a reminder to our audience that we'll be sending out information with a lot of good links and other important information, including these presentations to you in the next couple of days.
So as we say, good luck with your electrification projects, and we'll see you at the next one. Thanks all.